Hi, all. This is Sarah. I am here to talk to you all about Esther's story. It is one that demonstrates the power of faith, patience, and obedience. It's actually one of many stories I'm going to be highlighting about women of the Bible. There are some powerful stories there that are often overlooked, shunned, or misrepresented. And those stories can be just as powerful as men's stories. So, let's get into Queen Esther's story. The power of faith, patience, and obedience. Queen Esther's story. So, there is a moment in the beginning of this story where the king abuses his power. Intoxicated at the time, he's having a banquet, one that he's known to have, a lavish banquet. And at this banquet, his queen, he's ordering her to parade herself around in front of the guests because of her beauty. But she decides she's not going to do this. And as a result, he banishes her. So then the king goes on to hold a beauty banquet, or I'm sorry, a pageant, where he has young virgins there and he invites them to audition to be the new queen. Esther, an orphan, one who is hiding her identity as a Jew, she wins the contest and she becomes queen. Later on in the story, we're introduced to Haman. He's a resentful official who is enraged when Mordecai refuses to bow to him. Mordecai is the adoptive father and blood relative of Queen Esther. So Haman convinces the king to issue a decree, the deceiving one, where he's essentially ordering the destruction of all Jews. This is something that Esther and Mordecai must stop. And let me tell you how he presents this decree to the king. There's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples and all the provinces of your kingdom whose laws are different from those of all other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. So it is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. This statement is a gross exaggeration and misrepresentation of the Jewish people, and it's designed to incite fear and justify their destruction. So Mordecai discovers a plot. There are some people who are very close to the king who are trying to assassinate him. So he reveals his plot to Esther, who shares the message with the king, and this saves the king, and he earns credit. Mordecai does, but he's not immediately on. Later down the line, Esther risked her life. She does this by approaching the king uninvited. Let me tell you why that's important. King Xerxes has the power to take anyone's life if they choose to approach without an invitation. There is an exception, though. If he extends the golden scepter, it's a gesture that signifies grace, favor, and acceptance, and that person's life will be spared. And that's the case for Esther. Although she has a strong fear and she questions if she should do it, she overcomes that fear and she obeys anyway, saying, "If I perish, I perish." And so the king gives her an opportunity to a petition, and she has the opportunity to get up to half the kingdom, he says. But she decides, you know what? Let me invite the king and Haman to two banquets. And over time, she'll share her position. So, going on, Haman decides, after having another encounter with Mordecai that upsets him, that he's going to build a gallows to hang Mordecai. The way he was upset, well, there was another instance here where he was at the king's gate and Mordecai didn't stand before Haman or show fear. And so this caused him to go home upset and, like I say, decide to build a gallows. So at the first banquet, Esther decides that even though the king has said, hey, make your request, I'll give you up to half the kingdom, right? She decides to be strategic about things and she doesn't make the request at that particular banquet. She decides to petition for another banquet with Haman and the king there. So the king ends up having a sleepless night here. He has difficulty getting to bed, and so he decides, you know what, let me look at my book of Chronicles so that I can, feel a little bit better. It'll be uplifting for me. And he does so, he discovers that Mordecai hasn't been honored. So he wants to find a way to do that. And so Haman ends up showing up around this time. And so he goes to Haman and he says, you know what? I need advice how to best reward an honorable man. And Haman, believing the king meant him in his arrogance, suggests a grand celebration, complete with royal robes and a royal horse. And so what happens is then the king says, okay, give that to Haman. And so he has to honor the very person he just cannot stand. So at the second banquet, Queen Esther revealed to the king that Haman's plot to destroy her people. And so in a final act of dramatic justice, Haman was executed the way he had actually prepared for Mordecai. So on the same day that Haman's killed, King Xerxes gives Haman's estate to Esther. He also takes off the ring, the one he had just taken back from Haman, and gives it to Mordecai. And so, a home that belonged to Haman, Queen Esther decides to appoint Mordecai to rule over that home. So, as the story continues, Queen Esther requests that the king reverse Haman's decree against the Jews, but it's a formal decree, and that's not something you can reverse. So, what happens instead is the king grants Esther the authority to issue a new decree that gives Jews the right to fight back. So, because of this, they have that right to assembly and they do just that. And they end up winning the battle. They kill over or about 75,850 enemies. And among those enemies are Haman's 10 sons. And so they even have the right actually to take plunder from those they've killed, right? Taking their property, but they decide they don't want to do that. They just take their lives in defense of their own and move forward. So Mordecai records this time, one that was meant to bring destruction to the Jews and bring them sorrow, at least that's what Haman had planned, has become one of joy and celebration. They're enjoying one another, they're feasting, giving each other presents of food, and even giving gifts to the poor. It becomes a Jewish holiday still celebrated today that's known as Purim. It's one in which people will have a festive meal, have costumes, and also drown out the noise of Haman while they're reading the story. And so there are key traditions also you'll find in food gifts, giving to the poor yet again, and eating cookies. So Mordecai is second in rank here after this whole ordeal. He is honored for what he's done for the Jewish people. Because if you see in reading Esther's story, there are a lot of moments where Mordecai is guiding Esther as she is in position to save the Jews. So now that you have that rundown of Esther's story, let's talk about the life-changing lessons that we can learn from it. So first, let's get into the fact that God uses the willing. So Esther is an orphan, and she is promoted to a position as a heroic queen. And for Mordecai, he's a civilian and becomes second in rank to the king. So let's talk about the importance of this elevation. First of all, it obviously shows that God will use who has a surrendered heart. It doesn't matter about what position society has given you. If you really look back, you'll see that in a time that, Esther's story was unfolding, orphans like her were vulnerable, especially if they belonged to an exiled minority group such as she did, the Jews. Orphans like Esther were at risk for being treated as property and could be taken by force for sexual exploitation. Now, let's also talk about Esther's humbleness. She stayed focused and she was respectful and submissive. And you hear that in all the ways that she speaks to the king. She remains focused on the task at hand, and she talks to the king almost as if she's talking to the Most High. You'll see that in the scriptures I've laid out. And she's patient and willing. She had underwent 12 months of preparation before she was even able to see the king. That's a process that we should all be familiar with, preparation. And there's so much faith that she had. She practiced that faith over her obedience and fear. There was a moment where Mordecai had called her to petition to the king to override the decree that Haman had put in place. But, she was hesitant. She had fear. But she decided at some point, you know what? If I perish, I perish. So let's talk about why all that matters. God is in control. Your rank does not disqualify you for what God has planned for you. Remember that He's a sovereign God. He puts unlikely people in high positions, so it's difficult to deny that He's the reason behind it all. Also, humbleness here. Just know that you benefit from God's glory, but it's about His kingdom. So, like Esther, we cannot lose sight of that. So, you stay close to Him, you stay humble, you do what He calls you to do, and you don't lose sight of your purpose as a vessel. All right? And so then there's patience and willingness, right? Delay doesn't mean denial. Just because you don't get something immediately doesn't mean that it's not yours to get. But His timing is what we have to align with, not ours. And another thing here is about faith, right? And obedience over fear. We cannot let ourselves be stagnant because we have fear, right? It's there. We're humans, we're going to experience it. But we cannot let it or not let it stop us from doing what God has called us to do. So know that you're courageous as long as you move forward. So you'll see in this story how God turns evil for His good. So through Queen Esther, He carries out justice. What starts as an abuse of power, He turns into a huge moment of salvation for the Jews. An identity that's often overlooked earns an esteemed position. A moment of fear becomes an iconic moment of courage. Esther's afraid to approach the king, and she says, "If I perish, I perish." A quote many still reference today. And then Queen Esther's petition overrides an irreversible decree that was meant to harm the Jews. Through Mordecai and Esther, God also stops an assassination. King Xerxes forgot to honor him, but God led him to do it, keeping him up in the middle of the night. That's definitely God's MO. And then his adversary, Haman, planned and executed his honor. Haman didn't want to do that. He didn't want him honored. That was the last thing he wanted. It upset him to see it. But he had to do it. He set him up for a win. And then Mordecai also gained favor in a high rank. Another thing here, God turns a day that was meant to be a day of genocide into one of celebration. The Jews were able to defend themselves against thousands, undoubtedly using God's strength. And the Jews' devastation turned to a day of relaxation and celebration. There's even a holiday today that honors that time. Let's talk about why all this matters. This shows us that God redeems us. We don't have to fight our own battles. We just listen to God and He'll walk us into the victory we were always meant to have. So there's no need to fret or fear or lean on our own understanding. Also, we should focus on God and not the chaos around us. Things may not look good. It may seem like destruction is coming your way, but it's not the case. Things are not what they seem. You just have to let God move. Also, remember that God has nothing but good plans for you. So when you're following Him, when you're leaning on Him, you will get to the victory that is meant for you. Also, it reminds us that we don't lean on our own understanding. We can't look at things thinking, well, I know how this is going to turn out. I know what I need to do. You have to go to God to get the guidance you need. He knows things from the beginning to the end, even the middle. So you have to let Him lead and guide you and not lean on what you understand about the situation. We only see a little bit of it. You don't have the full picture like God does, kind of echoing those same sentiments. And God can use the very things that concern you now to make way for your win, right? This decree made way for another decree that landed the Jews in a position where they could celebrate. They have a holiday now that all started with a decree meant to take their lives. Also, delay is not denial. So just because you think that things are not happening right away, it doesn't mean that they won't happen in God's perfect timing. And remember that God will protect you. You can have a Haman in your life who despises you, who wants the worst for you, but at the end of the day, God will protect you. And God can make a way out of no way. That decree was irreversible. It really did seem like, well, this is a decree that there's nothing to do. But God knows something can be done because He's the waymaker. Also, this stands as a reminder that sin has its own consequence. Haman plotted to do evil, but it actually led to wins for his enemies. He died on the very gallows that he built for Mordecai. He tried to manipulate Esther by begging, but the king saw it as an assault and escalated his death. Haman's 10 sons died in what Haman himself intended to be a genocide against the Jews. So let's talk about why that matters. Evil hurts you more than it hurts others. When you go on to do something that you think is just going to really get the revenge you wanted for another person, you're going to end up hurting yourself. You'll get yourself ensnared in the very trap you're trying to set for others, right? Even just handling things in a sinful way, if you continue to do that your entire life, you're not going to end up in a good place. Repent so your sins don't consume you. God wants to extend His mercy to you, right? There was a time where there were some people who were planning to hurt the Jews on that day, right? That Haman had set aside for their destruction. And they ended up coming to the Lord. They ended up surrendering to Him to escape death. Now, God knows their heart. So We don't have to get too much into that. But the point is, if they were truly repenting, God would take them in and would help them for the rest of their life. Also, sin hardens your heart. Guard it by abiding in God. I feel like there were so many moments where Haman was so um like engulfed in his sin, he wasn't able to see what was happening. Like that moment of arrogance where he's like, "Oh, you're looking to honor someone? You know what? Let me tell you what you should do." And he ends up planning an honor for Mordecai. There's so many things he did as far as like building the gallows that he ended up suffering at the hands of. Also, we need to turn to God instead of sin because it'll save us. Again, there's that part where there were people who ended up converting to Judaism ahead of the battle. And so, whether it was for ungodly terror, that they felt, or reverence for God, there was a move there that they made as a result of, not wanting to face the consequences of sin. Also, this reminds us we should pray for our enemies. You're rooting for God to move in their lives. We are not riding with the devil. So we do not sit up here and wish the worst on people. We do not sit up here and want people to go on and continue to do bad because we don't want them to see God's light. No, we want to hope that people turn to God. So we should pray for them, right? And we don't want to dirty our souls like hoping for the worst for another person. So don't let sin trap you in that way. Another beautiful reality that you see throughout Esther's story is that God is moving in ways we don't always see. So God is never actually mentioned in his story or in this story, but his fingerprints are everywhere. God is always moving, even if we don't see it. There are promotion and qualifications despite the world's standards, right? With Esther's position and Mordecai's rank. Also, negative circumstances end with elevation and salvation. Very much God's move, right? There are times where faith and obedience win over fear, and where Esther is saying, you know what? If I perish, I perish. Enemies honor and recognize those they've hurt. Only God can arrange things where the very moment you are looking for someone's destruction, they come out on top. Only God can do that. And evil doesn't prosper. God's people, they see the redemption that is meant for them. All right? And the impossible becomes possible. He's a waymaker. Irreversible decree, that's all right. There's another one I'm going to have put in place. They're going to be able to fight their battles through my strength. Strength in adversity. There is strength in the moments that seem detrimental, right? There is strength in how they fought back and they were able to get what they needed to succeed, to survive. And God's people find peace in chaos, right? There was a moment or a day that was supposed to be chaotic, of destruction and despair, and there ended up being a day where they're celebrating still today that win over their enemies. And God's people take part in their own redemption, right? There are so many instances where God can handle things on his own, but he puts us in a position where we can be a part of our own redemption, right? We have you like usually like when it comes to our calling and our destiny, it's something that we've had to deal with in a negative light. It's a way the enemy has attacked us. And God's like, I'm going to use that time where you were attacked and I'm going to use it to elevate you. I'm going to help you prepare for it. I'm going to show you what you need to know, what you need to remember, so that you can take that with you when I elevate you. So you get to really be a part of your own redemption. And then God gets the glory through the betterment of his people. Anytime his people are elevated, others can see what happens when they allow God to move in their life. And, who man forgets, God will honor. So don't worry right now if you feel overlooked. More than likely, you're not overlooked, actually. You're actually being hidden for your own protection. So remember that. So let's talk about why all this matters. God makes his biggest moves in silence, working behind the scenes. Even when you're stagnant, God is moving. So, there are parts and there are times where we feel like, or we know that, God has asked us to move in a way that we haven't, right? And we look back at it whenever we're able to get over that hump and we say, man, I wasted all that time not moving because I didn't want to accept that reality. But don't you worry, because God is always moving behind the scenes. So your journey is never stagnant, even if you're not the one who's moving. All right. And so also you have to recognize that you can't miss what God has planned for you. He qualifies you, not man. So you don't need to fret about gaining or keeping a position. When God puts you in a place, he has done all this preparation so that when you get there, you'll stay there. He knows who you are. He knows the issues you're going to have when you get in this position. He sees the beginning, the middle, and the end. So he says, let me teach her now. Let me teach him now how not to be arrogant. Let me teach him now how to be humble, how to listen to me, how to take heed to all my instructions. So just remember that when you kind of fret about not being able to keep whatever God's going to give you. Don't trust your trauma and negative thoughts. God never abandons you. Lies can change your perception. All right. So sometimes when we feel like God is being silent, there's a couple things happening. Right. Sometimes our negative thoughts make it harder to hear Christ. We're sitting here thinking, God has left me alone. He's not moving. He's not talking to me. And it's because we're so filled with negative thoughts, we can't hear him. There's so much noise we take in from the outside world, things that don't edify God, so that it gets us to the point that we cannot hear Christ when he's speaking to us. So don't let your trauma thing, just because you can't hear Christ, that he's not right there leading you and guiding you, right? Also, faith isn't the absence of fear. Obedience unlocks blessings. Don't dismiss internal growth that isn't always flashy. There was a huge moment where Esther said, if I perish, I perish, right? And in the moment, she thinks, or some people may think that when they're fearful, it's like a moment of weakness and they're really down on themselves. But you have to remember that can be something huge later. It could be something people relate to. Now people can see that quote and they go, you know what? I'm an Esther. I'm someone who was fearful, but I moved anyways. And think about how courageous it is to move in fear. It's great when you move and you don't have a fear of something, right? Because God gives you that confidence, that courage. That's beautiful. But it's so amazing when you're fearful and you still move. Because you're saying, I'm not letting fear stop me. So that's something to really, really keep in mind there. There's internal growth that comes with those moments. God will prepare a table in front of your enemies for his glory. So your internal and your external elevation is a part of that. Focus on God. Do not fret when your enemies are getting elevated before you, because you don't know where the elevation is coming from, and that's not your focus. Your focus is God. There is stuff that He's doing with you externally and internally to get you where you need to be. And if you're always focused on like what's going on internally, you're going to, I'm sorry, if you're always focused on what's happening in the outside world, you're going to miss that internal growth, right? You're going to miss those moments, or at least they'll be delayed, right? You want to focus on God so He can get you where you need to go versus focusing on what's around you. All right. Then there's a point that God is a just God. He redeems His people at the right time. Do not think God has left you to survive on your own. He is helping you get where you need to be. All right. He is going to bring justice to your life. Don't let the chaos fool you. Nothing is impossible for God. I don't care how bad it looks. Matter of fact, the worse it looks, the better it is for God. God loves turning around a situation that looks impossible to show who He is and the amount of power He has over your life, right? And He doesn't do this in an egotistical way. He does this because He's excited about not only what it will do for you, but what it will do for others who see it. They'll know that there's a waymaker that's always going to get them to where they need to be. Also, you may be disheartened, but don't lose hope. Lean into God's strength and build endurance and resilience in a dark world. Just kind of adding on to that, right? Seek peace in knowing God never loses a battle. No one has the wisdom or the strength or anything that can overpower what God has for you. So don't you fret about the battle because God's going to win it every time. It's been won in the spiritual realm before it even happens here. So don't you worry about those things. Also, God may hide you for protection, but never never looks past you. All right. So I know sometimes you think, did God forget about me? I mean, I'm down here doing this. I've been faithful, and I'm not seeing it. I thought He was going to elevate me. I don't know what's going on. But God can be hiding you for protection. He wants to make sure that He's taking care of His sheep, that His sheep has to grow and has to learn and be ready for the elevation. So He's not going to expose you to the world until you're ready to handle what's called, right? He wants you to be able to take on the weight of the glory. And while you want to be elevated and all of that, you have to remember it has to be done in God's perfect timing, not yours. He doesn't want you crushed. All right. Also, know that God doesn't, that you don't fight battles alone. You lean on God's strength, His wisdom, and His direction. In the end, you'll be happy that you got to be a part of the battle. I know these Jews, they were happy that, you know what, I got to fight for myself. I got to defend myself. Time of celebration. And God always wants the best for His people. He gets the glory when you benefit from His love and enjoys gifting it to you. It also brings other people to Him. Self-explanatory there. Beautiful reality that comes with walking with Christ. So now, this is a great time to get in the comments and tell me, what did Esther's story teach you? What did you learn? Do you want to hear more about women of the Bible? Feel free to join my group called Growing in Christ. It's one on Meetup where we meet every week to discuss just whatever we're going through, right? Good things, bad things. We use it as a space to love on one another, help each other, encourage one another in our walk with Christ. Also, I'll be doing a presentation about once a month to highlight women of the Bible, talking about their stories, what they mean, and why they're seen the way they are today. So join me. Link in the bio. Thanks for your time. Thank you for watching. And if you want more, you can follow me on TikTok or find me on YouTube.